Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us again for this episode. I know I say it all the time, but thank you so much for your support and for the positive messages that you've either personally sent to the podcast or reviews that you've sent. It's been really awesome to see your support, your comments, your feedback, and just the overall positive community we're building here for the podcast. So thank you again. Now, today's episode is going to be about the read and react. In my experience, the read and react has gotten very popular. And for those of you who might not know a lot about read and react, I would highly suggest you do a little bit of research on it and look up Rick Torbett and read and react. He's the guru of it, and he's got plenty of information if you really want to go deep into it. But today's episode is going to be talking about the read and react in terms of the implementation, what it looks like in a practical sense. It's an offense that I personally have run before, so I have a little bit of experience with it. But my guest who I have with me today is one who has implemented it and has seen success with it. So we're going to dedicate today's episode towards that. And hopefully those listening, if you have used the read and react before, hopefully this will give you some little tips and tricks. And maybe if you haven't used it, maybe it'll pique your interest. Either way, it's going to be a great episode. And my guest joining me today to talk about the read and react is Coach David Henry. Coach, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Like I said off air, I kind of have a personal interest in this as somebody who's run the read and react myself. So looking forward to this one. It should be a good discussion. So Coach, let's go ahead and get started with your basketball journey, your coaching journey. Where's the game taking you, and where are you currently at right now?
Absolutely. So I am currently at Westside Christian High School up in the Portland, Oregon area. We're a 3A school, so kind of middle of the road in terms of size. This is my 6th year here with the head job. And previous to that, I was down in Southern Oregon at Cascade Christian under Coach Brian Morris, who I also played for. So I was there for 8 years coaching. And had the opportunity to learn just a ton from him. I mean, he's one of the top, I think, 7 or 8 winningest coaches in Oregon history, active or all time. So definitely a wealth of knowledge that I was able to gain from that. And so I've got a background, narrow background based on what we ran, and then just branching off from there, rebuilding the program here at Westside Christian.
So what was the rebuilding process like? When you talked about rebuilding, what were some things that you noticed that had to kind of be rebuilt or retooled to get where you wanted it to get to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really the reality is the talent just wasn't here. And so what we started with was just absolute development type drills and just constant development for the kids we had currently in the high school, and then the kids we were hoping that were going to come through, through camps and stuff like that. And just, creating a culture and creating just the basketball IQ and all that kind of things. And I wasn't used to that because we always won down at Cascade Christian. And so that was definitely a new experience for me too, just kind of figuring out, okay, a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about or trying to get through is above where they were at. So we had to kind of pump the brakes and just start from ground zero for most of it. And so, yeah, we've been on a journey.
And that really kind of tests you as a coach, doesn't it? Because there's all these things that you might be taking for granted or may have been able to get away with before because your players kind of got it and understood it. But then you go to rebuild a program and you find that you really have to kind of scale back, and you really, in a way, it's like you're testing yourself, like your own ability to coach and teach the game. At least I found that in my experience. Was that kind of the same for you?
Absolutely. Well, and I think one of the biggest things that I had to kind of go through is learning how to lose, which I don't know that we really ever want to learn that, at least for a long period of time, but just understanding how to measure success. And, for us at the time, for the first few years, it wasn't necessarily in wins and losses. It was, some other skill type and the development of the younger kids and just, different things like that. Figuring out how to play defense. I mean, just really basic stuff and just measuring success differently than how I had, in previous teams.
Yeah, I've been in that situation a couple times. The situation that you've kind of mentioned about measuring success differently, and I found that one of the things that personally helped me kind of get through that situation was hearing people who are familiar with the program before I got there being like, "Oh, coach, like it looks a lot better. Like things are looking a lot better, even if you don't see it on the scoreboard, and just sort of stay the course and keep going." And sometimes you almost got to find like your victories that way, because if you just measure it on the scoreboard, and even I know it's a little tangenty here, but even sometimes you might get situations of really successful programs where on the scoreboard, the wins and losses look good, but then even as a coach, you're like, yeah, we're winning, but this isn't quite where we want it to be. So there's a lot of different ways to measure success, I guess is what I'm saying. And it sounds like you kind of have that philosophy as well.
Absolutely.
So real quickly, just to touch on that subject one more time there about the rebuild. How long would you say that rebuilding process took before it got to a place that you were pretty happy with?
Yeah, I think we're still, I guess, technically
always going,
in that
huh?
process. Yeah, it's always going. And, we're a private school, so it's, we don't know necessarily year to year, who's coming in and all that kind of stuff. And so we end up losing, some kids that we would hope to get to various other schools, bigger schools, stuff like that. So it's hard because it definitely fluctuates. We've had guys that thought they should be playing at bigger schools transfer out. So the team we thought we were going to have didn't end up being quite as good. So, really last year was I felt we were kind of over the hump. We were going into the new year, we were number 5 in the state. And then my point guard, who's our best player, he's a junior this current year, broke his ankle. And we just didn't have the depth to hang in there. So we ended up kind of taking a little step back down the stretch. Really outside of that, we had a really great year. We would have been definitely a state tournament team, had that not happened. Fortunately for us this year, we've got some kids coming in that are pretty good. They're actual basketball players, and then we didn't lose very much. So we really have depth and ability too, which is great. So we're looking at hopefully, winning a couple state championships here over the next couple of years, because we're not really losing anybody this year either. So we're really fortunate the way, the kids have laid out in terms of their grades and whatnot. So we're really looking to see the fruit of the labor this year, probably more than we have in the past, but we're, kind of on the downward slope of that rebuild, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like you kind of set the table and now you're kind of ready to go at it and see what happens, and that's awesome. And you mentioned that you were 3A. What's the hierarchy there in Oregon? What does it go up or down to?
Yeah, so Oregon is 1 to 6A. So 6A is the largest, and
like
so we're in the middle classification, which is my favorite personally, just because there's a lot of quality basketball throughout the state. We happen to be in the Portland metro area, so where it's kind of concentrated here. But it's definitely really good basketball. Guys that have gone on to, D1, NBA type stuff over the years. And a couple of guys that faltered out that should have been in the league, but definitely a lot of quality.
For sure. Or I'm in 5A myself, and we're kind of in that same hierarchy, 1A to 6A. And I've also found playing or going to some of those 3A schools, there's some really good coaching going on there. There's some coaches who are like institutions in some of those programs who've been there forever and are just a wealth of knowledge.
Absolutely.
So some real cool stuff going on those levels for sure. Now, when we talked a little bit off air, one of the things that you mentioned was with the read and react, it was something that you, I believe, had implemented last year. So I wanted to kind of talk about your process with implementing and picking an offense in general. How has your philosophy changed, if at all, when it comes to like choosing your offense? And I guess what sort of led to you diving into the read and react last year?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've definitely, I guess, evolved over the years in terms of what we're running and how we're running it and stuff like that. I mean, I really like to dive into the minutia of things, just little, we're setting the screens this way or this angle, And I've definitely given the kids a lot more freedom over the years. Because I used to be really, I'll call it old school, is what my coach would say, in just terms of the execution piece of it. And one of the things that I realized is sometimes that's not the best thing for the kids that have some ability, that, give them a little bit of freedom to make some decisions and build that trust with them, because they're gonna do more of what you're wanting to do if you give them a little bit of a leash. So I've definitely given more freedom over the years, to say the least. I think part of that too comes with the fact that we've been a lot better. So we have the talent to be able to do that. Because a lot of times I've had teams where we kind of have to call set plays every single possession, because that's the only thing that's going to make them, semi-successful. Whereas now we have guys that know how to play. The basketball IQ's there, and they can play basketball, and we don't have to micromanage everything. So read and react for us was one of those things that allowed the flow of the game to be a little bit more smooth and give them that freedom, because we run it out of our transition. We run it out of any set plays that we may not get the look that we want. And so we just kind of fall back into that just as a base that we can do. And these guys can go make basketball plays. So we have some general guidelines that we utilize with that. So it's not just a free for all or an open gym type of a scenario, because it could certainly devolve into that. But for us, we have that trust with the players. And I've been very fortunate to, even though we haven't necessarily always had the best teams here, I've always had a very, very good point guard that I've had a really good relationship with. So I just put that trust there, and we can kind of play off of that a little bit.
So when you were putting in the read and react, and you were implementing it this past year, what was that conversation like with your players? Was it a little bit of an adjustment for them? Was it not too much of an adjustment? How quickly, I guess, was the transition for them to kind of go into this read and react?
I think it was a good one, because so I don't know how it is in some of the other states, but for example, in Oregon, as soon as Memorial Day hits, we're free to coach our players for summer league and whatnot. And so what we did is we put it in for summer league, and we didn't really run many of our other sets during summer league. And so we kind of put in some base rules and ran with that a lot going into the summer, I guess would have been 2020 2019, I guess at this point. So that way it's more freedom. And so we do that a lot for the summer leagues and stuff like that. Whereas during our regular season, hunting a state championship, we have a little bit more structure involved. And so then that we were able to focus on the transition into and out of our structured sets a little bit more. So I wouldn't say that it was much of an issue for them, because they had been playing open gym, because we have certain restrictions. We can only coach 2 of our kids at a time, certain times of the year. And so we just have open gym where they just kind of run up and down. And so it was a more structured version of that for them. So it wasn't a huge adjustment for them.
Yeah, and summer league and summer ball is like a perfect opportunity for that sort of stuff. You really can try out some new things and, really work on some stuff and throw something in, see what happens, implement this, see what happens. And sounds like a great opportunity, and it worked out really well. Always fascinated too, just as an aside, by all the states having their different rules in terms of contact and no contact. Here in Arizona, I think there are no rules. And so it's really interesting to see like dead periods and things like that, which I don't think is a bad thing either, but kind of have to really use your time wisely with that, which I just think is personally interesting. So read and react, kind of getting a little bit into minutia, but for those listening who know about it, this will sound familiar. A lot of layers. There's a lot of, if this happens, then this happens, just the, pass and cut. You can get all the terminology with, Laker cuts, X cuts. If a player drives, this happens, player slides, this way, this, that, and the other, dribble at, and all these other layers that can build all the way to layer like 10,000, I think, if you really want to get to that point. So what are some in the read and react? Do you have any of those like a non-negotiable? Are there certain layers or certain things that you've implemented? And talk about what that process has been like.
Yeah, so we kind of have a list of 20. We don't necessarily talk about the layers with the kids too much just because I don't want to overload their brains. We have certain actions that we like with certain kids. Some of those non-negotiables, though, are actually, I think, some of the first layers in terms of, once you pass, you have to cut. We're making a basket cut, or they can go set a ball screen or an away screen. Those are the first items there. But after that, we just kind of let them play to a certain degree. Now, if we see something and, we're coming out of a timeout, we may say, hey, let's hit the hammer screens over here. Or once you set that, let's roll off this. And so we'll kind of emphasize certain layers at certain points. But pretty much the way we've implemented it and the way we drill it is more conducive to who's out on the floor and what their abilities are. So that's kind of what we do versus making them memorize all 20 layers, because more or less they're doing them, they just don't know it. But it's, trying to manage what we stuff in their head and what we just, kind of play with, for sure.
So yeah, the non-negotiable, I think that's just kind of the hallmark there of the read and react is definitely the pass and cut for sure. The pass and then make a screen. And you mentioned how depending on the personnel that you have on the floor, there might be certain options. I guess it's almost like a menu in a way, read and react of different things that they might be able to do. I think you mentioned 20 in total. So what are some other things that players might do depending on the personnel? What are some other options that they might look at to try and do within the read and react the way that you run it?
Yeah, so some of the big things for us are hammer screens, flare screens, and then just slips in general, because we've got a couple kids that are just dead-eye shooters, and so teams seem to focus specifically on that. The other thing is we have a couple really big guards. Specifically our point guard he's massive for a point guard. And so we will, make him make the cut, but then instead of getting out right away, we may post him up once the defense responds, stuff like that. And then we may change the looks, going from 5 out to 4 round 1, stuff like that. We may move that guy around as well. So it's not always the same look that we're getting. And that's one of the things that I like so much about read and react is it's not something that you can scout, because everything's different every single time. It's not, prescribed, so to speak, like so many of the continuity offenses are.
Are you finding, in terms of the good looks that you're getting out of the read and react, you mentioned different types of screens a lot. You mentioned about the hammer screens and the flare screens and things of that. Are you getting a lot of your good looks on offense coming off of screens or screen related action?
Yeah, we are. We get some of the best looks we have. We're getting two different looks. We're getting looks right at the rim, or block in, so to speak, or we're getting wide open threes off of certain areas that we like to get those threes from. So for example, we have a kid that is just money from the corners, but put him in, we always kind of give him a hard time because we say he's allergic to the key. So he is basically a 3-point shooter. So we'll run specific actions for that off of the read and react. So we're not counting on him slipping a screen to go get a layup, because that's just not how he plays. So we're, curling off those screens, different things like that. So for example, if we pass from the top over, let's say to the left seam, we'll go screen away, and that guy will, the other wing, the weak side wing, will just curl off. And more times than not, we're wide open in the middle of the key, for wide open layup or a little floater. And then if, for example, another opportunity that we would have is we had a really nice big guy last year that we would just stick down in the short corner. We would run that same action, and then we would be able to pass that right in the middle of the key and then draw that defender and drop down for a layup from him. So certain things like that. So we're really in the read and react offense, we're really getting layups or dunks and then threes, it fits our team quite well. I mean, I'm definitely, as I mentioned earlier, old school. So I like the mid range too. That's kind of disappearing, but from this, we do happen to get a lot of that. So I'm not going to be too upset with shots at the rim for sure.
Yeah. I mean, get shot. I mean, I think the that's the analytics side, isn't it? Shots at the rim and corner threes or
Right. Yeah,
free throws.
exactly.
I think
Yeah.
that's like, those are the shots that you want to get, but I love the mid range too, for sure. And to me, one of the things I really like about read and react, and I think you can definitely speak to this in the way that your offense seems to be running, is the ball's always moving. There's always action. There's always things happening, because I know personally for me, it drives me crazy when the ball sticks, and the ball just sticks in somebody's hand and like nothing's happening. So I think that one of the things that it seems like you're getting a lot of is you're getting a lot of just movement. The ball's moving and the ball's just finding the open man. Am I right in that? Because that's what I'm picturing in my head.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's the one of the biggest strengths, but it's also one of the biggest weaknesses for us is
Mhm.
a lot of times it does help get the ball moving, which we really like. But it also is probably our biggest weakness. And there's sometimes we get stuck watching, and so we pass a stand, and it's like, okay, a lot of the courses that I've looked at this, and coaches I've talked to that run it is, the one of the main things is if it's pass and stand, it's not the read and react. And so sometimes we get stuck into that, watching our teammates and whatnot, which is great because they're successful. But in terms of what we're trying to do offensively, that's just not what we want. I'm not a big fan of dribbling, more than we have to anyway. And so we always want to be moving and making the ball and, swing around the perimeter and whatnot, and only dribble when we have to, rather than just sit there and watch somebody dribble and everyone's standing. Because as we all know, the defense isn't moving at that point. So, so it's definitely one of those double-edged swords for us anyway. And it's just a matter of repetition and harping into the kids. But it's good movement, but it also has the opportunity for us to just pass and watch.
Well, I've even seen, and I don't know if you've seen this happen as well, but we just mentioned how one of the rules in the read and react is the pass and then cut. And one of the things that can end up happening, one of the traps that players can get into, is players can pass and then cut, but then they kind of cut half-heartedly and they don't cut with an intent to look like they're going to score, look like they're even like involved. They're just kind of going through the motions. And it's funny because we think of like read and react as all this stuff going on, and your players aren't just going to necessarily go for the motions. But I've kind of noticed sometimes that I've had players who they'll pass and they'll cut, and it's like, oh yeah, sure, give me the ball, but they're not really looking like they're gonna ever get the ball and score. Do you ever encounter like situations where even players are just sort of passing and they're cutting and it looks like they're going for the motions? And if so, have you been able to jumble that up and break that up at all?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is our kids are actually more critical about it than I am a lot of times, which
Nice.
is kind of a flip of the script, to say the least. And so they will actually get on each other more times than not if they're not cutting hard. So usually it's one guy, and there's a one reason or another, I guess. But we try to sub them out just to change it up. If that kid's the weak link, so to speak, in terms of effort. Efforts, for us is a non-negotiable program wide, not just on offense. But that is definitely something that, fortunately for us, the kids are actually policing better than or more than what we need to do. And so, a lot of times I'll kind of pull back, my comments or coaching, I guess, at that point, if I'm watching them take care of their own, so to speak. And just generally for us, when I have kind of brainwashed our kids in terms of, we're not running offensive sets or anything like that, whether it be read and react or anything else. We're not doing that to make me feel good or show people that I can make you run an offense. We're just simply doing this for scoring opportunities. And so unless there's a specific time in a game where we got to, run the clock out a little bit or what have you, if we get a good look off the first pass, or if it's fast break or whatever it may be, that's an opportunity for us. And if it's a good one, we're going to take it. And so, we try to run fast, and we play, I call it controlled chaos. We want to run as long as it makes sense and it's a wise basketball play, but these guys know that if I cut hard and I get open, and make that layup right away, then great. That's what we're looking for. And so we don't see that too often, but again, when we do, the kids are really good at policing that.
Perfect. It's always great to have a team that can police itself and saves you some words that you have to say or some things you have to do. And it shows your team is bought in. Like, all right, players took care of it. So I know that you're invested in what's going on there on the court,
For sure.
which always helps. And that's also, I think, one of the tenets of read and react that is tough to keep in mind, at least for me personally, is that when you're going through the different looks and the different options, it's not about necessarily getting something off the first or second pass. Like if you can, that's great. But really, one of the beauties of the read and react is breaking down a defense over time by constantly having to make them adjust or see what's going on in the court and having to point out when different people are going and different screens and everything that's happening. So I think it needs like a certain level of patience to keep that in mind. And when you're running it, do you find that you are kind of going through multiple passes? Is there a certain like sweet spot where like, all right, now I know I've gotten this defense all out of sorts because we've run this action X amount of times in a row? What's that kind of been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we're on average, we're probably 7 to 10 passes in when the defense is just kind of over it. If I'll just use that term. You know, the interesting thing for us too here in Oregon, we don't have a shot clock, unfortunately.
Neither here, unfortunately.
You know, so yeah, so we could
really
just grind that out and continue running it, you know, for several minutes at a time if we chose to. You know, but I would say, you know, we're somewhere in that 6 to 10. You know, and really the thing for us that we've found is if two defenders get hung up, whether it be a screen or a cut, then one misses a cut and the one's over helping, that's typically is the indicator for us that, you know, they've broken, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll either get, you know, an open three or, you know, an easy basket cut at that point. You know, that's kind of been the tell for us more than anything else.
You've mentioned the importance of screening and different types of screens that get set in order for you to get really good opportunities. And I always like to ask this question when it comes up. How do you teach setting screens? What does a good screen look like for you?
Yeah, so for us, I mean, it's kind of funny because sometimes we have to adjust based on how they're calling it on a given year. And so, you know, for us,
frustrating.
You know, what's that?
I said that can get a little frustrating, but no, I totally get it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we got to adjust a little bit, you know, and obviously game to game, it's going to change a little bit, but, you know, for us, you know, it's a good athletic stance. You know, we typically teach to kind of pinch our jerseys with our thumbs. You know, we're not doing the old school cover the groin area, you know, kind of lazy. We want to be active and we want to be hunting head, so to speak. You know, so we're trying to be really physical with it. And then adjust to, you know, kind of pull back because we can always be less aggressive, but it's really hard to teach kids to be more aggressive in the course of a game. Mm-hmm. You know, so we harp on, you know, setting up screens, you know, from the offensive guy. And so if we've got guys leaving early in practice, for example, they're taking off early, mm-hmm. We'll harp on them and I'll say, okay, well, you just got, you know, Johnny his third foul. So he has to go sit on the bench because you were, you know, being impatient. So you've got him on the bench and now, you know, you also blew an opportunity for yourself to score, you know, so we just really harp on the timing, you know, so, you know, athletic, you know, physical stance, you know, hands at our sternum area. And we're trying to kind of more or less set those a third to half of the way through the person's body in a sense, because if we practice that way, when we actually get to the games, they're going to be more where they need to be versus, you know, leaving too much space to allow the defender to jump through. So we don't get called on moving screens very much, but typically once we get to the game, it's about where they should be anyway.
And you mentioned that the screening action that you get out of the read and react seems to really throw some defenses off. Have you found that, like, in your experience, that the other teams that you're playing against, are they just not ready for the amount of screens that you're putting in as you go for a read and react rotation? Are they just not adjusting them correctly? I'm not trying to put anybody on blast that you're playing, but just for coaches out there, it seems like maybe if they're getting that screen action going, that it really seems to disrupt some defenses.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for us with read and react is it's not prescribed. You know, so the coaches, fortunately for us, or in Oregon at the 3A level, I would say that top to bottom, we've got the best coaches in the state for any classification. And not to put anyone else down, but I just think top to bottom, we've got some
Sure,
great
sure,
coaches.
of course.
And so it's really a major chess game in terms of X's and O's. And so for example, with continuity type offenses, a lot of the teams will already know, what's coming, whether it be the swing or the flex or, what have you. So they've already got that scouted out. And so for the continuity offenses that we run, we will already have counters in place. So that way, when once they, do this, then we do that. But with the read and react, the kids are the ones that are making the decisions, real time. And so the defenders don't have an idea of where they're going. And so I think that's probably the biggest reason that they're, thrown off a little bit, because, all of a sudden we have one hammer screen and then it turns into, a stagger screen for the same type of action, 2 passes later, and they're not necessarily prepared for that because they don't know exactly what's coming or when it's coming. So
Yeah,
I think that's one of the biggest things that has given us a competitive advantage that way.
it's like the other team's like, we know what you're going to run, we just don't know how you're going to run it or what it's going to end up looking like. And you as a coach, you're like, I don't know either.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know what
I
they're
don't know
going
if
to
that's
do.
good or bad sometimes.
Yeah, that's that letting go piece, which I know as
For
a
sure.
coach is always a bit of a tough situation, but when it works out, it's great. It's like, oh, I look like a genius. Look at what they're doing out there. So you talked about, I think it was it the year before, 4 out, 1 in? I think a lot of coaches who do the read and react are always looking for ways to really get the guy in the 1 in the best position possible. So you talk about the guy who's in the 1 in. Where would you like him to be? What sort of decisions are you looking if you do have a 4 out and then a 1 in type situation?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it depends on who that is. I guess that should go for everybody. For us, it was our 5 guy. He was kind of clumsy, big, broad shoulder, but, we really didn't want him on the perimeter or putting the ball on the floor at all. And so a lot of times what we would do is we would put him down short corner, and we would either dump it in and make some cuts. So we'd get, swing the ball around, pass him the short corner, and then we'd have a basket cut, which would be good. Or we would let him take 1 or 2 dribbles using his size, because he was one of the bigger guys in our league last year. And senior kid. So he was experienced to death. So we kept him close enough to the basket so he wasn't going to, dribble it off his foot or what have you. But we've had some other guys where I've got a big guard that could play, anywhere from the 2 to the 5 pretty easily. And he's just a bully. So we will actually put him at the mid post sometimes, and run the shuffle cuts off of him, or, just pass it in and let him go to work, that kind of thing. So it depends on who it is for us. If it's not an athletic type of a kid or needs to have his back to the basket, we may adjust that down to even the block, to really simplify it for him. But for us, the majority of what we did last year was simply putting our guy short corner to short corner and giving him the freedom to go side to side in the short corners, and then on occasion flash to the block if he had an advantage over his defender. So trying to keep it real simple for him.
And that could easily work just because the defense still has to account for that person there. And at least in my experience, I've seen some really good looks going that short corner to short corner, especially in zones and things like that, where that guy can just sort of sneak in behind the defense, and the defense just like forgets that they're there. And sometimes you just get like a easy look in there. I think it's great. I think if you can use, that little short corner area or things like that, I think it's awesome. And like you said, it made it sound like you've kind of make it simple, where like, here are your positions that you go, and we're not going to overcomplicate things. And he still had decisions that he got to make, but he didn't have to think about the game too much, I guess, if that makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah. We just, catch the ball, go finish. And, that seemed to work pretty well for him.
And was he ever in a position, or maybe not with this person in particular, but maybe if you had a more skilled or just more basketball savvy one, would you be looking for him to, what sort of action would you ideally have if you had a 1 who was maybe that more traditional, like skilled player who could be in that 1 position? What would you ideally like to have happen if you had that sort of player?
Yeah, I mean, for us, there's certain actions we like just generally in offenses. And so, for example, one of the things that we'll be doing this year with the team that we have is pulling that guy up a little bit more, so we could be looking at working at the elbow potentially as well, because our size this year can also shoot pretty well. And so, one of the things that we found that we've been able to get some looks with this particular group is making that cut off of like turns into essentially a UCLA screen off the elbow, and then that guy then popping up for a perimeter shot. But instead of it just being the 5-out type of a situation, he's working the 6 spots inside the 3-point line, which for us are the elbows, the mid post, and then the short corners. And so being able to work off of that. So we do a lot of UCLA cuts, screen the screener type stuff. And so working off of that, and then potentially, then setting up slips off of those, proposed screens or projected screens, just based on the size. Because we've got a kid that's, I don't know, 6'4", 6'5", and he's got arms to the floor that can, hammer down pretty good, but he can also shoot quite well. So we're just trying to, fortunately, we've got an abundance of talent, and we're trying to utilize all of it as much as we can. So that way it's harder to scout us and whatnot. But we'll definitely be moving around that one again this year, just because he's a lot more athletic, and the basketball IQ is quite a bit higher.
Yeah, and let's touch on that, because part of the read and react requires the players to do the reading and being able to see what's going on the floor and make the correct decisions. So let's talk about the process of getting your players' basketball IQ up. What were some things that either they did or some things that you kind of helped them with to kind of help them make the best decisions possible on the floor?
Yeah, so so first of all, we call the read and react. In our offense, it's called rock and roll. And so every day during warmups, we do probably about 5 to 7 minutes. We call it rock and roll shots. And so those generally will change throughout the week, or excuse me, the weeks. So one week we'll have 3 or 4 actions that they work on. So, they roll off the hammer or what have you. And so they instantly get into that, and our whole warm up. So 20 to 30 minutes to start practice, while my assistant and I are kind of talking and figuring out, everything. I mean, we've got the practice plan in place, but just kind of talking about nuances and what have you. Our guys run the warm ups themselves. So they're getting themselves into rock and roll shots and stuff like that. And so they've already, it's a little muscle memory type stuff, and choosing how to make those decisions. However, once we get to 5-on-5 and running it through for the offensive portion of our practice, we will often throw an extra defender out there, and we won't necessarily tell them what his job is per se. So it could be just a basic 5-on-6, or it could be, okay, you're going to just double this, or you're going to double the screen when it comes here, or follow this guy around, that kind of thing. And so that way it will change how they look at the offense and see, oh, I need to make this decision because that's now not there when I wanted to go to my buddy over here for whatever reason. And so we've just trying to change the variables to where they have to figure out what the best option is for them. And so that's one of the biggest things. We have a couple of guys that are really, really smart with that. And so fortunately they'll take it. And then, sometimes we have to give them a little bit of a nudge for sure. But oftentimes we're just changing the variables so that way their IQ and their brains working in terms of, what makes sense right now, rather than, A to B to C robot type basketball, which is what we're trying to get rid of by running this offense for sure.
Sounds like a bit of like a science experiment. Adding these different variables. Let's see what happens here. It's like a big test that you're kind of running. But absolutely. I mean, it's a good situation to really, in a way, like kind of prescribe and kind of see where your player's decision making is, because you can like put a player, like, all right, we're going to have this specific situation set up, and I think I know how they're going to act or react, but let's see what happens. And in a way, it's like a controlled environment where you can at least see how they react there, rather than necessarily have to wait till that situation comes up in a game. And I'm sure in your experience now of running it, you kind of know maybe some of the situations that like your players might get in, and you can kind of be purposeful in like putting your team in those situations in practice and then just kind of running through it and just seeing what happens. And that's kind of what I want to ask you about. Like, what are some things you do in practice? Is that something you kind of do, set those situations up? Because I'm always curious about how people kind of refine their read and react in a practice type situation.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things for us is our defense, our scout team, I guess, they won't know what's happening in terms of the read react, which is nice because sometimes, with the continuity type offenses, they know it, so they're going to try and cheat it, jump in, be the JV hero type of a deal. It's like, okay, great, you got the steal, well, you knew that was coming. But for us, the biggest thing is just talking it through and repping it, because we will find that we start running same actions. We kind of get into a little bit of a rut in terms of what choices they're making, which aren't necessarily wrong, but it can also become a little bit predictable. We obviously recognize it more than the other teams because we've seen it over and over and over, and we know the players. But then maybe addressing that and say, hey, let's try this and what have you. And so the nice thing is, as we have games and we're able to see it a little bit more against someone in a different colored jersey, we can then go back to the drawing board with them and talk about it. Or, after the next time out, we can talk through that and say, okay, let's specifically go for this type of action here to kind of get us back into it and out of this specific rut. So, there's for practice, other than just repping it and changing some of the variables, there's not a whole lot that we've done to really get out of that because it hasn't been too much of a problem for us. But I think the one thing that I would say that we will, address during practice is if we start running the same type of action over and over again, like I touched on there. So that would probably be the one thing that I would say that we will fix and refine there, and just hopefully influence how they're looking at the situation. So that way they can make the best decision, because what they are doing may be the best, decision for that situation, but we want to make sure that they have all the options, at the forefront of their mind in order to make sure that that's the case.
And if they're getting into that rut where, they're just passing or cutting, passing, doing the same sort of like screen and just sort of getting into that rut of doing the same action over and over again, if you found that sort of rut happens regardless of the defense that's been playing, or do they get into different ruts depending on like what defense is being shown out there? I'm just curious about what that might look like.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say the ruts for sure are just, when we run it against man, one of the things against the zone that can be a little frustrating for me that we're still working through is the ball movement tends to slow down a little bit, and they kind of roam a little bit more in the middle versus going to the spots that they're supposed to be going to and then getting out. And so that's certainly part of the process that we're refining for sure, is against the zones, because we do see more zone that I like. I'm not a big zone fan for sure, but it can be effective for certainly, because most coaches spend so much time working their man offense. For us, it's nice because we can just go. It doesn't make any difference if they're zone, man, what have you. Read and react works. It's just the difference is finding the space versus going all the way to the front of the rim and whatnot. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I think that for us the ruts happen against man, and they're maybe trying to pick on one defender or whatnot, and it's like, okay, let's yeah, that's great, but let's keep it working.
I've seen that too, where there's like, no coach, I got him, I just got to keep going, and then all of a sudden it's like we're just in this endless loop, and I'm like, all right, we gotta do something different here. Can't just keep watching this
well, for sure. Yeah, and I think for me, one of the things that we'll do is we'll just call set play, or we'll switch to another offense for a possession or two, just to kind of reset and refresh their minds a little bit. I touched on this earlier. My point guard's really, really smart. So, I pretty much let him call the games most of the time, and, unless it's out of timeouts or, whatnot, and just kind of, worry about some of the other stuff. But, sometimes it's like, okay, we're kind of getting stuck, or, we've gone 3 possessions and, we've gotten good shots, but they're not going in. So let's change it up and kind of get their heads back up where they belong and go from there. And then we can go back to it, of course, but, just change. I like to change looks, to refresh them.
And just to continue with that topic of sometimes players getting into a rut, I think I've seen where, and I've had to work to try and break this habit a little bit, is players they get like really comfortable with one certain type of action. Like they know, like, okay, I'm here on the floor with these four certain players, so all I need to do is just like shoot, or all I'm supposed to do is just, roll off this screen and just catch and shoot, or all I'm supposed to do is just drive and make something happen. Have you worked through or had to work through situations like that where you've kind of had to, shake players up where it's like, okay, this is primarily what you would like you to do, but like also try doing this as well? If you had to balance that or come across that at all?
Yeah, we will actually put in rules in practice for certain kids that you can't do this, or you have to do
Players
this.
love that.
We've got a couple kids, it's kind of an embarrassment of riches for now, which is nice. But we've got a couple kids that are a little timid at the rim, and it's like, okay, every time you finish, you have to dunk it. Or, a kid that likes to shoot threes, it's like you can't shoot anything outside the 3-point line. And so one of the things that with this offense that can happen because they have choices is they could ice somebody out if they wanted to, or we got a freshman in there that we don't know if he knows what he's doing yet or what have you. So they're making different decisions to kind of almost hide that kid in a way where in practice we will force it, and so it's like, okay, we have to run let's say 6 or 7 passes, and then Johnny has to score or what have you. So that way we're forcing that. And then, the nice thing is that kid's confidence comes up. And so with his confidence coming up, the other kids, around him, they'll start believing in him more as well, to kind of build that team camaraderie. And, fortunately, we haven't had too many of the instances where, we just don't like this guy, so we're not going to pass him the ball. It does happen. And I think for me, it's happened more on the AAU type of side than it has for school ball, this familiarity or what have you, and that's one of the variables that we can change, in practice is, okay, well, you have to pass it to, whoever, and kind of force that action and force the movement that we're looking for.
I think that what you said is one of the best things that you could potentially do to really work on your read and react is do just that, where you have like you're running it and you have a certain thing where this player has to be the one who has to like get the shot up or get the look up, or has to take it to the basket, or you have to find a way to get this person an open shot, because in a read and react, like we've just talked about, the defense can get still thrown completely off course, and you can completely blow up a defense if you're especially going 8 to 10 passes. And if you could even announce like, hey, this is what we're looking for, is this particular person to score. If you're really running the read and react really well, you could still have the defense know what's happening, but still completely blow them up with all these screens and all these different looks that before you know it, if you're really doing it well, that one player that you singled out is still going to get that look. I think that would be a really good effective option for if you really want to like test to see if your read and react is going well. That might be something I want to do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think too, that particular kid, if they're used to just shooting threes off screens, or being the passive one in the group, if we're forcing them to be the guy that has the look, I found that, especially with the younger guys, their motor turns up just a little bit. They find another gear, and so those cuts are a little bit harder, a little bit faster, and their passes are a little bit more crisp, versus just, catch, it's not there, okay, kind of a little bit more lethargic. So that's been one of the things too, that all of a sudden the energy is up for that particular kid too.
Yeah, and they get to, I think players can get into their own rut where if they just see themselves like, okay, I just shoot threes here in this offense, then their motivation, if they have to like pass and cut, it's like, well, why would I cut that hard? I'm never gonna, get the ball and score here. Right. And so you kind of work it in that way. And yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I'll go and try and tell my girls they got to finish with a dunk too, and we'll see how that,
there you go.
We'll see how they respond to that. That's funny. So you since you have recently implemented and really kind of gone all in on the read and react, it's probably fresh in your mind, some of like the growing pains and maybe some of the things for coaches to maybe watch out for when it comes to them implementing it. And I feel like there's always coaches, it seems like every year, who are looking to jump into the read and react and make it happen. So for those coaches listening who might be like interested in running it or implementing it themselves, what is some advice you would give on some of the growing pains and some of the things to watch out for to maximize its effectiveness?
Yeah, well, I think for us, one of the things that worked really well, and this is certainly what I would recommend, is start slow and keep it simple. So like, for example, I know I referenced 20 different layers earlier.
Yes, you did.
You can be successful, especially depending on the level, but you can be successful with, just putting a few of those in. And for us, I didn't even necessarily say, okay, level 1. And so I'm not calling out, okay, run level 7, in the game. I'm not doing that. So we're just talking through it and they just get into the habit of it. So I guess one of the traps, that I would make sure that you pay attention to when you're implementing it is just make sure that the movement is happening, that the ball's moving, that the cuts are being made, because that's still, to this day, is still our biggest weakness with it. Is, like I mentioned earlier, is just the pass and stand, and we get caught in that, which kills the whole thing. And then then you've got the kid that, well, no one else is moving, so now I've got to start dribbling. Yeah. And that really blows the whole thing up. Obviously there's some dribbling into it, driving here and there, but for the most part, the majority of the offense should be run with passes, simply. There really shouldn't be a whole lot of dribbling into it, in my opinion. So those would be the first couple things. Just keep it simple. The spacing is just huge. Specifically with the passes and the cuts being made. So especially when you're starting, at least for us, we would get somebody that would cut and go to one of the 6 spots in the middle, like we talked about, flashing in there, but then they would stay too long. And so the next kid's cutting and then he's running into that guy. Well, it was a great cut, but he just ran right into his teammate. So therefore the pass wasn't open. And stuff like that. So there's, be patient with it when you're a coach. There's going to be some frustrations. It's going to be messy, I think, at first, but if you can, get them to the 5 spots, get a few of the layers in just in terms of pass, cut, a couple screen actions that you like out of it, you're going to start seeing some of it, and they'll probably start growing faster than you're putting it in terms of the different actions that they're seeing out of it. So, for me, just pick the things that you like, if that's a shuffle cut, if that's a UCLA cut, teach those, and then you can add more as you grow. But, I think those are some of the biggest things for me that I was coaching. We've used this with some 3rd graders all the way up to our varsity boys team, and obviously the levels vary for sure, but some of the basics, the spacing and the movement, are really should be non-negotiables at every level, boys, girls, kids to, even college potentially.
And I think one of the things for new coaches who might be thinking about the read and react is you definitely have to assess the learning curve. If your players are coming from, a continuity type offense where there's prescribed things that they do and maybe they haven't really thought about the game, I think that level of patience, you're going to have more of it, because you're almost in a way like teaching your kids to just like completely rethink the way that they play basketball. And I don't know about you, but I know for me, when I was putting it in, that was a bit of a process for just teaching the game of basketball. I think I found that a lot of times I've had players who didn't really know why they were doing what they were doing on the court. It was just doing what they've always been told what to do. And to me, that was a huge learning curve. I don't know if you've had that experience as well, or you had situations like that come up with players.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where depending on where we get, like I mentioned earlier, we get kids from all over. So
sure.
Unfortunately, I don't get to control who their youth coaches are to start running our stuff earlier, which would be nice. But, yeah. You're starting, because we also have a lot of international kids. And so some of the kids we have just generally, have zero basketball experience, or some that are, legit going to play at the next level. And, we've got to be able to coach to all of them. And so it's definitely a learning curve. Because if kids come from robot programs, and that's, I know I'm supposed to do this, and then that's it, you got to really harp and drill and all that kind of stuff, the decision making, the basketball piece of it, because any kid could go A to B and throw a ball. It's really the decision making and the basketball piece of it that separates everything else out. And so patience, I think the coaches are probably going to be more frustrated than the kids will be, for the most part. But if you can kind of hang with it and stick with it and really see it through, you're going to be much more pleased than you were at the start, for sure.
Well, I'm also really glad that you brought that up in terms of like the frustration levels, because I had to be reminded of this, that I see like videos of read and react being done and it looks like great and the decision making is all done, but like that's a finished product. And like that's what it looks like once the players like have it down and they're able to, make all these looks and all these decisions. And sometimes, at least for me as a coach, I know I want to get to, step C before I'm at step A, because I know where I'm trying to get to. So you have to really get the patience and just build on it. Like when you learn about the read and react, they talk about layers. And I mean, I think that's a really good way to kind of think about it, is you just kind of, like you mentioned, build in this one part, see what that looks like, do your refinements, and then build the other and build the other. And another thing that you mentioned, which is a great point, is that you really only need a few layers before like you're really running something. You put in a few layers and then all of a sudden like, oh, wait a minute, this doesn't look too bad. It's only a few layers, but like they're spacing. And I think that's one of the big tenets about read and react is the spacing and the amount of looks that you get on. I think actually you mentioned that specifically, that you really like the read and react because the amount of spacing that it creates.
Yeah. I mean, for us, it's really nice because it gives them space to create, and it's you can definitely tell when teams don't have good spacing when they're running this, because the coach is probably jumping up and down on the side and all that kind of stuff, and it just gets messy if they're too close or jumbled, and it's just not successful. So the patience is a big piece of that part of it too, because there's going to be times where, okay, well, I thought I had this drive and now I don't, and I'm stuck on the baseline with no dribble, and someone tries to cut, so there's stuff like that where you're gonna get your wires. It just is what it is. And understanding that it's a process, and I don't know if I mentioned this, but our kids that don't know basketball but are out there wanting to play at some of our lower levels, it's nice because we can just say, okay, once you pass, just cut to the basket. If you don't get the ball, just run into the open spot.
Here's the other space.
Literally keep it as simple as that. And honestly, that's how I would start it with young kids, third, fourth grade, whatever.
Get the 5 dots out.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, just little pieces on the tape on the floor. Yeah. It's like, okay, run to this spot once you pass, and if it's not there, go. But I mean, for us, spacing is huge. We run a lot of the same type of fronts, so to speak, with all of the stuff we run. And so this kind of fits and flows into this and out of our transition. So for us, it's just really nice because it's an emphasis to keep wide, to get the spacing, and it just makes everything so much easier.
And you have that spacing, you're passing the ball, and I think every coach loves when the ball's being passed versus dribbling that much. You get those good spacing, get those passes in, and just looks nice to have a nice good pass, a nice good cut, and a nice good finish at the basket. Just like,
it makes everybody
perfect.
Feel really
makes everyone feel good as long as they make the free throws if they get fouled. Yeah. I wanted to ask about kind of the balance that you have if you're getting out into transition. I know that there are some coaches who they have the read and react, but to them, like that's almost like their I won't call their backup, but they'd much prefer to just kind of run up and down the floor and play it that way, and then go into like a read and react if they have to. I've also known some coaches who, they'll get the rebound and they won't necessarily look to get out in transition. They won't, risk it, for a lack of a better term, and they'll just be happy to get up into their read and react and feel like they have a better chance to score that way. So what is that like for you? Are you looking to just go in transition if you can, or are you perfectly good with just slowing things down to set it up? What's your philosophy on that?
Well, so I call our style controlled chaos. So we like to run, if we can get the ball up the floor, for a layup or what have you, that's what we're looking for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But if it doesn't look like it's a high probability, so if we're 1-on-3 or what have you, then we'll get into a half court set, whether that's read and react or whatever else that we're doing at the time. We also, our transition is not necessarily prescribed like some coaches. I recently was coaching with an AAU program that had 5 different lanes. And if you were, number 2, you had to run all the way over here for this lane. And for me, I'm like, let's get to the wings. Let's fill it. If we can get a rim runner, let's go. But, we call it flow. And it's actually the Portland Trailblazers transition offense that David Vanderpool, who's with Minnesota Timberwolves now, talked a lot about. And, basically it's kind of the same idea as getting the guys on the wings, potentially a rim runner, but if the post guys are both back, then you can do a single or a double drag screen off of that and then play off of that. So we call it a 7 or a 77, depending on if there's 1 or 2 screens. Because then we're already in, if it's not there, for a basket right off the bat there, we're already in the read and react type
transitions.
Yeah, exactly. So it flows really nice for us.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think if you can have your transition, it's not there. All right, we'll just set up into our offense, nothing lost, and we can just get right into what we want to get into. So,
exactly.
And I'm just curious, that controlled chaos. I know that we just talked about read and react. Does that fall into defense too, or are you pressing? Are you getting up on teams in that way? Is it a whole like team philosophy of controlled chaos? Both sides.
Yeah, I mean it varies depending on who we play and the situation for sure. But generally we like to put full court pressure on for 94 feet. And then there's times where we're just aggressive. We generally play aggressive man-to-man defense. We'll play a little 1-1-3 or different 2-3 trap or what have you here and there, but generally speaking we're aggressive on the line, up the line, physical man-to-man defense. And that's I've been doing that since I was a kid, so that's all I really know. So we try to create as much of our offense out of our defense as possible. So we haven't had, as like I mentioned before, we didn't have the depth for a few years, so we had to be a little bit more careful with how aggressive we were being with that. But now we've got probably 9 or 10 kids that can all be in the game, so the foul trouble is not quite as big of an issue for us as it has been in the past.
It's always nice when you can just go to the bench and start throwing bodies and start throwing people in and going to work that way. Yeah, absolutely. All right, this was really good. And again, for those listening, there's so many resources out there for read and react, but I highly recommend, as Coach mentioned, just start a couple layers, see what it looks like, just build, be patient, and it'll come in time. It's very easy to get overwhelmed by the 5,000 layers that like Rick Torbett and all them have, but you don't need all that. You don't need all that. I promise. So Coach, there's a couple of questions I ask every guest to wrap up. So we'll start with this first one here. What is a coaching moment from your career that you think others listening would be able to learn from?
That's a good one. I mean, for me, I think there's a couple moments that stand out. We've had, when I first got to Westside here, we were not very good. And it made it really easy for me to make this decision. But we had a kid that he wasn't really a basketball player, but he was our manager and worked hard, and we gave him the opportunity to play on senior night. We lost. I mean, we were terrible, just to be honest. We were terrible. And, he got out there, scored a bucket, and still to this day, he's like 24, 25 now, and still, his mom talks about it. And we got, just you could just tell that it meant so much to them. And so I think for me, just understanding when to care about the X's and O's and the basketball piece of it, and when to really invest in the people aspect of it. Because really, at the end of the day, the game is wonderful, but it's nothing without the relationships and the people.
Yeah. And when you are successful and you have a really successful program with players that you've also invested in as people, like it's just so much more rewarding that way. And I mean, that story that you mentioned, it's so great. And it's so interesting when you talk to former players of yours, the things that they remember, the moments that they cherish, They might be things that like you don't even really remember at all, but there's certain things that'll definitely stick with them. And I mean, that moment, I'm sure, stuck with a lot of people because, oh, that person got to score. But I think it's just always fascinating, the things that players remember. It's not going to be that great baseline out of bounds play that you drew up. Usually, it'll usually be other moments that showed, to them that like, wow, my coach cared about me, or my coach did this for me. And it's very rarely X's and O's. At least that's what I found. I'm sure you've probably had similar experiences like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And to wrap up, Coach, I give every guest what I call a 60-second soapbox, but feel free to go longer if you want. It's an opportunity for you to get out your final thought, closing message, just a final idea that you want to leave the listeners with. So I'm going to open up the floor to you, Coach, and you can take it away.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. I think for me, I would just say it's always tough to watch when people lose perspective on why they're coaching or how they're coaching. Kids need to be cared about, and we're seeing that more so this year probably than ever before. At least the magnifying glass is definitely on it. And I just would just suggest to everybody to just really invest in the relationships with the kids, because those relationships are going to last, far past the time that you get to coach them. And so how you make them feel and building those things up in them is going to be far more important than, can they, shoot a free throw correctly, or is their form perfect, what have you. Because we recently lost a young man that is really close to our program. He took his own life earlier this week. And, it just reiterates, you got to check in with people as much as possible, because we can't control everything right now, but we want to do the best we can to show everyone that we're there for them, and if they need to talk, we're here. So that's really close to my heart. This young man didn't go to our school, but he came to our camps growing up. And I remember giving him a hard time because we always had the argument of LeBron or Jordan being greater, and I'm sitting there arguing with a sixth grader over this, and just a lot of good memories from that. So I just would just encourage everybody, make sure you stay plugged into the kids' lives, engage with them, and just check on them as much as you can.
Yeah, it's a great message. And it's just a reminder to me to go and do that. Like I try to do it regularly, but you saying that's like, all right, just make sure I reach out to a few tomorrow. Sure. I think sometimes, or a lot of times, it's really interesting because I think that we have such access to our players in terms of like the ability to like send them a message, that because we have that access, sometimes we actually forget to do it because like, oh, we can just easily just go reach in our phone whenever we want to, but then we don't do it or don't do it as much as we should. So yeah, no, that's a really good reminder. And thank you for sharing that story. That's really unfortunate, but it is a really good reminder to us that, just send out that message and, check up on your players. And like you said, we can't do everything necessarily, but who knows how far, a message like that can go for some of our players for sure. So thank you. That's a really good reminder to all of us. So Coach, I want to thank you for spending some time talking about Read and React, talking about your program and all the things that you have going on. It sounds like you got some exciting things coming up with your program and a team that looks like it's ready to make some noise. So I wish you luck on that. Thank you so much, and good luck going forward. I'm excited to see how things turn out for you. Thank you, Coach. Really appreciate it.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you all for listening to this episode of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We'll see you guys next time. Take care.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.